Hello. This is Derek from Wonderful Tea and Tao Teaware. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so that last episode, in my mind, was a bit of an in-between episode. I didn't really talk too much about sourcing tea, but rather I talked about the adventures I get up to while sourcing tea, which is kind of a syntax error in syntax right there, where it's not quite tea, but it is tea anyways. I really enjoyed talking about the cultural histories, the rituals, the celebrations, that Dai Minority New Year, the Water Splashing Festival. If you haven't realized by now, I really love this kind of mythological standpoint and viewpoint of the world, because all of these stories is just where magic meets reality. And I love just living in this liminal space between the two, if you know what I mean. So in this episode, I'll try and keep it down a little more into actually sourcing tea, grounded, rooted. Right now it's springtime, so all the buds are blooming. The leaves are just beginning to be harvested in Suzhou and in Hangzhou, and I'll get into that real quick. But in this episode, what I really want to cover is my sourcing time down in Xishuangbanna. Xishuangbanna is the part furthest south in Yunnan, really where it dips down into that region where all the borders and all the jungles and whatnot. In recent years, it seems like everybody is sourcing Pu'er tea out of Xishuangbanna, and I have my suspicion that it's just because it's, the most adventurous. Like down here, the trees are wild, the gardens are forgotten, and the land is just massive. And so you can just wander through jungles, through mountains, and discover whole villages that really haven't been popularized, but they're making incredible teas. And so I feel like everyone's kind of digging deep into this like jungled wilderness in hopes of finding that magic village, which I'll talk about, later in this episode. But like I said, Xishuangbanna is down in that region. We get Menghai, we get Mengsong, and we'll get the topic of the mountain range that I'm talking about in this episode is the Huazhuliangzi. That's the region I went to. It means like slippery bamboo ridgepole. I think it's like the highest mountain in all of Xishuangbanna, and the ridgepole is like kind of the idea that it's holding up the roof of Bana, if you will. So, in the previous episode, when I was talking about Mengsong, we met a lot of people. We met Dujie, the cab driver. We met Lanjie, the ex-cab driver, now turned Pu'er sourcer. We met Asai and his Li brother, up in Shigui. And then we also met Mengjie and Lao Duan, her husband. Those people I really like. They do the Bangdong tea. And then, of course, I had a long tangent talking about Gao Lei and this more modern Bingdao farmer. I hesitate to call Gao Lei a farmer because in my mind, he's so far removed from that farmer archetype. I would consider him more of a curator, somebody like that, but he is involved in the process of actually making the tea, though. So it's kind of this interesting space what he does. So now, thinking about all these people we've met, we're going to switch gears in this episode, and I'll introduce a whole new cast of characters. You'll meet the Pu'er driver. I think it's Mr. Zheng. I think I talked about him previously because he drives me all the time every time I go visit Paul in Menghai. I'll talk about the man Paul and White 2T, the formidable force behind that really interesting, artistic, innovative Pu'er tea company. If you guys don't know White 2T, that's 2 the numeral. It's incredible. Really cool stuff, really pushing the envelope of, what to expect out of your tea. I'll talk about the farmers I met down in Huazhuliangzi and the Mengsong region. That's Farmer Tan and his sister Xiao. I'm laughing because there are a few other people I should probably talk about. This farmer, his English name was Jason, and he sources border region teas that at first I was really excited about and very quickly became very uncomfortable with. I'll tell you that story here in a bit. But as I previously hinted at, right now I want to talk about what's going on in the tea world because it is March 22nd and a lot of stuff is going on. It is spring. The tea season has officially begun. And what's interesting is it took a while to begin this year. It was right now it's just past the vernal equinox, right, on March 20th. Usually what happens if you remember all the solar terms. I talk about this in the fooding white tea types. That's episode 8 because the solar terms are very important on distinguishing their types of tea. The solar terms are the 24 solar terms of the Chinese agricultural calendar. And so what they did is they broke up the entire year into 24 2-week terms, and these terms are all given names, they're given festivals, and certain things happen throughout the natural world during these seasons. And so March 7th was a solar term called the awakening of insects. And then March 20th is the spring equinox solar term. Usually for green teas, it's right around the awakening of insects that a lot of tea stuff starts to begin, a lot of harvesting, a little bit of harvesting for tea begins, but really it doesn't really happen usually until like the Ides of March. That's March 15th for those of you who don't know the classics. Beware the Ides of March. Let's see. So usually tea begins in at least the Jiangsu, that's Suzhou Bilochun, and the Zhejiang region, that's Hangzhou, Longjing, or the Dragon Well. That stuff usually begins right around March 15th. This year, we were an entire week late. Yesterday was the first day that my friends at the Nine Trees, Jiushu Tea House in the Mandrelong village of the Westlake Dragon Well started harvesting for the very first time this year. And my Bilochun farmer is very similar. Like, he was able to harvest in Xishandao, in that island in the middle of Lake Tai, just a few days before that. So I don't know if I've really mentioned this before, but a lot of times during this time period, before the Qingming festival, and speaking of solar terms, the Qingming is the next festival right after the solar equinox. And so it's 2 weeks after March 20th, which is usually April 5th. And a lot of the best green tea is picked before the Qingming festival. This is the Mingqian teas. And so this is kind of the date a lot of these green tea people are really organizing their picking and processing and sales around. In fact, right now we're doing the pre-sale of all of our Mingqian teas. This is a little unnerving because, you can't decide on what the weather is going to be. This year, everything is really late. Why is that? It was because it was very, very cold. It was actually, in my opinion, I think the teas this year are going to be fantastic because the weather was actually very good, just not on time. And so what we saw here in at least the Jiangsu and the Zhejiang region, we saw a whole lot of late rain in the winter. Late winter rain. It was a very wet winter. And then it dried up, and it's been really dry and really cold for the past month. And this gives the plants and the tea leaves everything they need to really grow, to pop and bloom and germinate, but they're just germinating very, very slowly. And I think this will probably create a really, really interesting, tasty tea right at the very beginning. Just everything's a little more concentrated through that slow growth. I mean, I've heard people talk about why is mountain tea so good. It's because the lack of sunlight, it's the slow growing conditions, it's everything like this. Like, the slower it takes to germinate, the better the tea will be. This is kind of folk knowledge, folk wisdom. Of course, I don't know any science behind it, but that's usually what you'll hear when you're talking about tea. Another thing is we all had snow this year. And another thing the farmers say is, like, in all of the regions that they're making tea, there is blanketed by snow, which doesn't happen every year. And a lot of the farmers say this means the tea will be really sweet in spring. And we'll see. But anyways, everyone's just been going crazy waiting for that Mingqian tea. It's really like some of the biggest excitement in the tea world here in domestic China. Everyone's posting about it. Everyone's talking about it. People are trying to buy the earliest type of tea. I think my friend told me that a farmer messaged him and was like, hey, I just I've been picking a handful of tea every day and I just got enough for like 500 grams if you want to buy it. And my buddy's like, listen, just relax, just wait. I'll buy the tea when you have enough. You don't need to go out and pick like 100 grams of tea every day from the tiniest, smallest buds. Like, just wait until there's a lot of tea and then sell me that. But it's just like Everyone's trying to get the one up on each other for getting tea before everyone else. And so it's just a really crazy time to be alive here in China and experience this like Ming Chan tea culture. One thing that my friends, and I saw this trend start happening all throughout the WeChat moments. WeChat is like the social media where people are taking photos and posting it, sharing their life. Friends with a lot of tea farmers, and they're posting photos of their germinating tea bushes day by day. And so it's like, it's March 15th and they post their tea bushes and nothing is going on. Not a single bud anywhere. I'm seeing other like white tea farmers like talking to their parents who are living on the farm. They're living in like Hangzhou or Yangzhou, and they're asking their parents like, "Hey, any tea yet?" And the parents are sending photos of just like nothing happening on the bushes. And they're like, "I'm checking the weather every day, asking my dad, and there's still no tea." And so this year it's just been really interesting the amount of like kind of like frustration people are seeing with the weather. Another thing I saw was people were sharing photos of how big their germinating tea leaves are. And so they're showing like just the buds of tea, but they're using things to kind of give you the scale. I saw one person using like a little measuring tape, other people using calipers. Somebody found like a measuring app on their phone and was shared a photo of that. Another person's like, a tea farmer has like a lighter, a cigarette lighter held up next to his tea plant. Who's like, that's how big the leaf is now. And I'm just seeing these trends. Everyone's just super excited. And so, yeah, I had to take a moment to just talk about it because, again, this year, while it might be a little slow to start with the cold weather, I think it's going to create a better tea than if it was just very, very fast. Last year, we had a different problem with the green teas. There was too much rain. If you've listened to my episodes, you know about this. There's too much rain in Chaozhou, there's too much rain in Zhejiang and Jiangsu last year, and then in Yunnan it was a total drought. And so I haven't checked the weather in Yunnan, but here in Jiangsu and Suzhou, it was really great for a lot of rain in the winter, cool weather now. But when it's raining, you don't want to pick the tea. And so if you only have like 2 weeks to pick the tea and sell your Ming Chan tea before April 5th hits, that's a really scary business when you're rained out half the time. And so the yield is essentially halved. Do you increase the price twice as much? This is the supply and demand question. Luckily, last year, a lot of the farmers, they just ate the loss, and they sold their tea at the same price, and they just didn't sell as much. This year, I suppose, with the late germination, the farmers are seeing the same kind of shortage of Mingqian teas. But in my opinion, it's a little different because it only affects how much you can sell. It doesn't affect the quality of the tea. I think the quality of the tea this year is just going to be much better. So I'm actually planning a trip to go out to Hangzhou next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That will be the 25th, 26th, 27th. And in my mind, that was supposed to be kind of later in the season, like later in the Ming Chen season when most of the stuff is ready. Right now, I'm not even sure how much tea they'll have for sale. Last year, I remember I bought the March 24th harvest of the Longjing, of the Baihefeng, the White Crane Peak. This year, I'm doing a lot of the White Crane Peak again. This is the Chuntijong, which is the heirloom varietal, and then also the number 43. The number 43 cultivar is slightly earlier in germinating than the Chuntijong, and I think it was really created in the 90s, I believe, 1990s. Chuntijong is the heirloom cultivar. This is the stuff in the Chantang region that was the original home of like the Longjing tea. Another one to know about is the new Wuniuzao. Wuniuzao is like the very, very late February germinating tea bush that is technically a Longjing tea, but if you look at the leaves, they're going to be short and fat, and they look very, very different from the longer, spindly Dragon Ball 43 of the Chuntijong. Anyways, this episode is not about Dragon Ball. If you're interested about Dragon Ball, go back to the Dragon Ball episodes or look at my Instagram because I'll be sharing a lot of cool stuff once I go to the Hangzhou Westlake area next week. But now, to get back to this episode, we're still in Mengsong. So sticking with the narrative thread I've been following, this is last year. This is the 2023 spring tea trip. It's about April 16th. If you remember in the last episode, I talked about the Dai New Year. That usually happens from April 13th to April 15th. Everything shuts down. I had some tea cakes I was waiting to get pressed, and then the factory shuts down for these days. I stick around in Linsong long enough to kind of see the pressing of my other tea cakes, and see the final wrapping of the Shigui Pu'er. That's one thing maybe I didn't mention when I was talking about the pressing Pu'er. After they press it, they wrap it in the muslin cloths, let it cool down for a few hours, then take it out of the muslin sleeves, and then they put it in a drying room that is very dry, a little warm, and they set it in there for a few days. And so really like it did work out perfect timing wise where I had to wait a few days in order to see it finally, wrapped up in paper. Again, this is something the Ocean guys did not do right when I bought the tea and they pressed it and then put it into a plastic bag and it all molded. So very important to dry out your teas after you steam and press them. So I am still in Linsong, but I am about to leave, and I'm still just thinking about just the beautiful kind of flow state I've been in while I was in Linsong. Everything just worked out really well, and the teas tasted great. And I trust myself well enough. I have enough self confidence in my own opinions and my own beliefs to realize like this is good. It's not just sometimes you kind of doubt yourself where it's like, oh, it's the easy stuff is not always the best stuff. But for me, I had tasted a whole lot of teas. I go in this flow state. I find the right people, and I'm drinking really exceptional teas. The price seems fair to me, and I'm like, yeah, everything just checks out. And so, actually, I could talk about it, or I could share with you. I found a journal from the time, and I kind of wrote about my feelings and the experience of it, about finding Lanjie, finding the tea farmers, pressing the tea cakes, and just how magical it was. So, here's a little page from my notebook, if you will. This life is filled with miraculous moments of astounding magic. The surprising instances where all shifting scenes align perfectly, and an opening appears between all obstacles. This is the door of fate, the empty hub held open just for you at the heart of fortune's wheel. So take a deep breath and plunge through, for such moments of perfection are temporary and elusive at best. And so for me, this kind of just sums up that idea where everything just lined up perfectly. And all I had to do was just keep to the path. And it just like everything just worked out, got my tea cakes pressed. I'm really pleased with them. I'm actually still drinking on them now. Like the Bang Dong, the Magic Drought, the Kwa Shan, the Hummingbird. Oh, those teas are so good. I can't wait to go back this year and press more. So leaving Linsong, again, I'm so happy they completed the Gaotie. The Gaotie is the high-speed train. And so I take the high-speed train back to Kunming and then make a transfer in Kunming all the way down to Jinghong. Jinghong is in Xishuangbanna. It's one of the bigger cities there. That's usually where the airport is for Xishuangbanna. And then from there, you can either go east towards Yiwu or west towards Menghai. And on this trip, I'm going into Menghai. What's actually funny about this is I was not intending on sourcing tea when I came to Menghai. When I came to Xishuangbanna, my goal here was to see an old friend, somebody that I've been, hanging out with for the past couple of years. Really great guy. I might have talked about him before. It's Paul from Y2T. And if you don't know anything about him, he does have a rather mysterious persona, and so I won't get too far into like the details of his personal life. This isn't that kind of podcast. But I do talk about all the people I meet and the characters that I interact with in this tea sourcing trip and this whole adventure. So he will get a mention and a shout out. But what I always do when I get to Xishuangbanna, I land in Jinghong if I take a plane, or I take the high-speed train, and I also get to Jinghong. And then I call one of Paul's old contacts. This is Driver Zheng. This is the guy I've used every single time. I've talked about him before. He is like one of 9. He lives with his whole family. He's older. His son has his getting a biology degree in the university. He lives with his 90-something-year-old father, and they all live together in Menghai. And they're originally from Pu'er. Pu'er is Samao, which is the old heart of the Pu'er region. And then he's moved down here just a little better for work, but he's essentially hired out as a private cabbie. And he's just a really, really genuine, nice guy. I really enjoy him. I enjoy hanging out with him, enjoy hearing his life story, because he's one of those guys you just start talking to him, and then a few hours later you know everything about him. Actually, when I was hanging out with Paul and his wife, we actually played a Mr. Jung Jeopardy game. It's like, who knows the most obscure facts about this cab driver? It was pretty impressive the amount of information we had on him. Anyways, I get a hotel in Meng'hai, and so I have Mr. Jung bring me there. Oh, I don't think I've mentioned kind of the journey from Jinghong into Meng'hai. This is tropical. Jungle, deep jungle, trees, mountains. It doesn't even feel like China. It feels like another country entirely. But we do get to a checkpoint, and this is where it does feel like China. You get to a checkpoint, and people come over and they check their car. I think what happens, sometimes they ask you to get out of the car, sometimes they talk to you. What usually happens is two border patrol people talk to you at the same time. So there's the driver and the passenger. And so somebody comes over and they talk to Mr. Zhang and ask them all this information. At the same time, somebody comes over to me, the passenger side, and they start asking me the same questions, kind of in different orders. And so they're like, what are you doing here? How long are you going to be here? How do you know each other? What's in the bag? What are your plans? When are you leaving? And then they ask us all these questions. They take all these notes. They get this information, and then they go back around and they communicate to each other. They say, like, does their story match? And I was like, this is a brilliant tactic. And so, like, if the story doesn't match, then they dig a little deeper. If the story matches, they're like, okay, yep, just go on. And they kind of record, the cab, how long it'll be here, does the story hold up, and whatnot. It's usually pretty chill. I have seen one time where somebody was getting arrested. The reason it is so heavily controlled is because there are some drugs being run up through the borders. Some illegal goods, a little bit of smuggling and stuff like that. This is, to use my absolute favorite Chengyu, Tiangao Huangdi Yuan. This is the border region. The heaven is high, the emperor is far away, and it's a little lawless. And so here at this checkpoint, they're really enforcing the laws pretty heavily. And so, yeah, I saw one guy with his suitcase open and he got cuffed and led away. But again, they're not looking for people selling tea. They don't care how much tea I have. So I'm not too worried about that. Anyways, Mr. Jung tells me his life story as we wait, and then we get into Meng'hai, and I find my hotel. It's kind of like a minsu. A minsu is, what is that, an Airbnb? So it's a little more casual. And I get in there to check in, and I see they have been just squeegeed the floor, and somebody has a bucket of water, and they're filling up a water gun as they look up from the counter at me, and I'm like, oh God, please don't. This is still the water festival. Like, remnants of that are still going on. The celebration, the god's head is still rotting away. Anyways, they smile. They don't spray me with water or anything. I get checked into the hotel, and yeah, it's really nice. Again, the weather down here is tropical. Even though it's like mid-April, it feels like high summer. It's really pleasant in the heat. And so what I do is, as soon as I get in, I head over to where Paul's at, Y2T. And so he has an apartment in Meng'hai. I think he actually bought it, which is incredible because a lot of people, including myself, we live in the nicer cities, right? And then we travel to the mountains once a week, for a week at a time, maybe for a month if you're like me. But somebody like Paul, he's so committed that he's living there. Like, he's there all the time. And so this is why it's like he can do stuff that no one else can. He can press these cakes in ways that no one else is doing it. He can check on the storage, check on the farms. He's got roots in this area like nobody else has that I really know of, that I'm friends with. But yeah, so getting over to hanging out with Paul, and again, like, this was my main reason for coming here. I really didn't think about sourcing tea until I was like, you know what, like, might as well. I'm here anyways, right? But anyways, I get over to Paul's place, and we just instantly, of course, sit down and drink tea. And this is, I think, if you come away with anything about like what the guy behind Y2T is, he loves tea, and he loves the teas that he's pressing. He loves the teas that he's aging. He's so happy about what he's doing, and he's so proud of it too. And I think I'm really taken by it because he's doing stuff that very few other people are doing, and he's looking at the long-term future development of pu'er, of raw pu'er, of cooked pu'er. He's looking at legacy. He's looking at future. He's looking at how can I do things better than they've ever been done, which for me, so much respect on that end. And like just sitting down with him and drinking tea, you can see how passionate he is. You can feel the passion come through, and you realize, like, man, like your teas really are something special. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and really, like, that's about the extent of what I'd like to say on him, because he is a rather private person, right? And so he doesn't really have a social media front where he's just face the camera and talking to you. Unlike me, unlike my partner Dart from Tao Teaware, we are very much open about it. Transparent, we're personal, we tell you about our experiences, our thoughts, and our stories. Paul is something more behind the scenes, so I'll let him stay there. One thing that's cool about people in the tea industry, like Paul from White to Tea, Jonah from Bitterleaf, we're not very competitive with each other. It's kind of open. Of course, there are certain things where we're not openly sharing our contacts and like I'm buying tea from the same farm Paul is, or Bitterleaf is buying tea from my farms, or something like that. We all have been doing this long enough that we have our own connections. And I think as long as, like, you find the tea that you like, the farmer that you like, and you're doing your own thing, no one's at a loss here, because all the teas are going to be different. Everyone's taste is going to be different, and there's more than enough tea in China to spread out over the whole world. And so it's really cool to be able to communicate and, get some feedback from like somebody who's also doing it as well. And so while I've been friends with Paul for a long time, he's never like said like, oh, here's a tea farm to go to. Here's a farmer to go to. And so I kind of talk about, now that I am in Meng'hai, I might as well start sourcing tea. And he's giving me some tips. He's like, you know what, you could try and go to the wholesale market. You could go to the tea market. I think there's a tea market here, but the funny thing is Meng'hai is a tiny town. It's very small. There's like a few like intersections of like paved roads, more than a few. They're a fair amount. But it's not far until you start getting into dirt roads, until you start getting into pure countryside. And so to call Meng'hai a city is a stretch. It's more of like a developed town. And I would say like 80%, maybe 70% of the businesses here are tea-related businesses. They're selling tea from different places in Sichuanbana, in Yunnan, in Linsong. It's all pu'er. And so it kind of gets a little overwhelming when you're walking through a town like this. I mentioned Dian To in one of the earlier episodes, the white tea, where I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. You go in and you can only drink so much tea in one day. And a lot of times the people in the shops will try and detain you. And so it's really like you have to open yourself up to luck. And so my first day and a half or so doing that in Meng'hai, I did not meet the right luck. I had some great tea. I had some Lao Man I had some Ban Pen. I had some really cool stuff that I really enjoyed, but they were buying it from somebody else, right? And so I couldn't find that direct line all the way to the mountains. I went into one tea. This is the funny story. It's Jason, that tea farmer. So I went into his tea because it said Myanmar tea, and I was like, wow. I buy the Lao tea. I really enjoy that. I think there's a lot to be said about border region tea because it's kind of less respected, right? And so the tea in the regions, it's still like the terroir is still almost the same. Maybe the processing is a little different, but at the same time, it shouldn't be overlooked as much as it is. And so I went into that Myanmar tea house and I was like talking to them. I was really, really interested. And then after like a few cups, after like an hour or so, the teas are okay, nothing mind-blowing. The owner comes back. His name is Jason. He's a Chinese guy, and he's just telling me his English is very good, and he's telling me about why Myanmar tea is better. And the first thing he says, he goes, the reason our teas have a benefit that we can pass on to you is because it's grown and processed in Myanmar. Our pickers are from Myanmar. We don't have to pay them as much as Chinese pickers. And I'm just like, whoa. Oh, he's like, the tea is cheaper because it's Myanmar tea. We don't have to pay as much. And all of this saved money that we're not paying the pickers, we pass on in savings to you. And at this point, I'm just like looking at the door. I'm like, this is not good. This is not good. I need to get out of here very quickly before he tells me like the pickers are children or something. The reason they can pick such small leaves. Anyways, so that was a red flag for me, and I kind of backed out of that conversation pretty quickly. Deleted his WeChat. And I'm going into other tea houses as well, trying to find decent tea, trying to find good connections. And I found one place. It's a little bigger than I liked, but they were growing tea that was really good from Huaju Liangzi in Mengsong. And I was like, this is really nice. I'm really pleased with this tea. And I schedule like a time to go up to their factory the next day. And they're like, next morning, if you're still around, you just hop in, come over to the tea house, and we'll take you up to the factory. And they showed me pictures of the factory, and it's massive. It's a really big factory. Like they have like 12 walks going at once, and a lot of like makers and stuff like that. And for me, I'm like, this isn't really my scene. This is not really what I'm looking for. I'm thinking of Mongjie. I'm thinking of Asai. I'm thinking of these smaller like 2-3 person teams that are making tea. That's what I want to find. Now, if you remember my white tea sourcing trips, what I was talking about during that time, the different levels of luck. When I get into Dianto, how I work with it and stuff like that. And there are 4 main types of luck that I've kept in mind since reading that book, hearing that podcast, or whatever that talked about it. And the first level of luck is blind luck, where luck just happens to you. You don't have to do anything. You get a phone call. You won a lottery. Somebody knocks on your door on accident and gives you something. That's blind luck. It's very rare, really magical. The second one is luck from motion. The idea here is that luck exists in the world, and the more you get out, the more you travel, the more you walk around, the more people you interact with, the higher the chance is that you bump into something lucky. The third level of luck is luck from awareness. This happens after you've already been out about in the world, and you start getting a knack for luck. You start understanding where luck happens, what luck looks like, what a good place to be is, right? And so this is kind of like tricky, where it's like you have to kind of realize very quickly, this is that intuition where it's like, oh, this is a good place, this is not a good place, this is a very lucky place, whatnot. And so I've been bumping around trying to find that luck, and it just hasn't worked for me for the day and a half I was in Meng'hai. Whereas, in Linsong, I was incredibly lucky immediately, right? And so I'm getting a little frustrated. I'm like, it's been 36 hours and I don't have any good leads. But, I post something on my WeChat moments of me in Sichuanbana drinking all these different teas. I'm like, oh, it's so cool, like to see all the different styles. And then I get a message. And this is like, it's almost like blind luck, right? I get a message from my old Chinese tutor, who was an online tutor, and she's from Sichuanbana. And I remember during that time, it was back in like 2017. I haven't talked to her in years and years. And she messages me. She's like, hey, are you in Sichuanbana? Like, I just left Sichuanbana. I was like, oh, that's too bad. We could have met up and, hung out. And she's like, what are you doing there? I was like, I'm looking for tea. She's like, do you know anyone? I'm like, no, I don't. She's like, I know a lot of people. And I'm like, that sounds good. And so she reaches out to a bunch of people in that area. She was like, what teas are you looking for? And, Huaju Liangzi was on my mind because I just had that really good one. I was like, oh, I'm kind of thinking about going up to Huaju Liangzi tomorrow. She's like, okay. And then she sends me a few different contacts. Some of them are in town. Some of them are outside of town. And I eventually get interacted with, who is it? I think it's Farmer Tan's sister, and she's in Jinghong. And she just kind of, from Jinghong, instructs me on how to get out to Farmer Tan and her home, her village in the Baotang region. And I kind of said it's almost like blind luck, but the more I think about it, it's almost that 4th level of luck, which I didn't talk about. 4th is the highest number of the luck numbers, by the way. I talked about the 1st level is blind luck, 2nd level is luck by motion, 3rd level is luck by awareness, 4th level is luck by notoriety. And the fourth level is actually oddly similar to the first level, wherein the luck comes to you. Notoriety meaning you're famous enough that people who have opportunities present opportunities to you. And so that's essentially what was happening there. Maybe I posted on my WeChat, I'm friends with enough people, I have enough connections, people are paying attention to what I'm doing enough that I mention I'm in this region, and somebody comes to me. And God bless my old Chinese teacher, because this whole story wouldn't have happened without her help, her intervention. And so the next day I arrange, instead of getting on the car and getting on that truck and going up to that factory, from those people, I arranged with Mr. Zheng to drive me out to Mengsong. And, Mr. Zheng is like, it's going to be tricky because, like, if I go into the mountains, I can't get a ride back. I can't get any cabs back and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I'll pay you a little extra. It'll be fine. Mr. Zheng's like, okay, I'll do it. But we just have a very kind of vague, like, farmer directions where it's like, get into Mengsong and the municipality, you'll see this, and then go up that road and the second road and ask for this area, and then you'll get up there and you'll see the factory, the little studio. The name is blah blah blah. It's the Huzwo Show, which is cooperative. And I was like, oh, it's a cooperative. That's really cool. And so God bless Mr. Zheng, because he takes me out there. We go past the border patrol. We answer all their questions again, and we get onto the roads. This is a little different because it's still relatively well maintained, these roads. It's not deep jungle. The roads here are like mostly paved. You see a lot of rice paddies, some valleys, and mountains rising in the distance. And of course, we're going up to the Huazhu Liangzi, that ridge, and so we're going up the mountains eventually. And as soon as we start going up the mountains, then the roads get a little tricky. They get much more narrow, and you still get a lot of bigger trucks, and so the shoulders are really, really deep, and it's essentially just a single paved road that some people have to back up. You have to turn around. You have to find a place where you can pull off the road without toppling your car over. But Mr. Zheng gets us up there, and then we see the sign, which is the Menghai Baotang Cha Ye Juan Ye Hezwo She, which means Menghai. Menghai is the region. Then Baotang is the village. Cha Ye Juan Ye is professional tea. Hezwo She is cooperative. And so it's essentially just the Baotang village professional tea cooperative. I'm not exactly sure if it's what the sign is. I kind of asked him how many families are in this cooperative, and he said something close to like 80. And so I feel like what's happening here is a lot of people, they're processing the tea themselves, but they're all within the same cooperative, and they're still selling it together. I think the cooperative aspect is more about ownership of the leaves, because I was asking him, whose are these trees? And he's like, there are trees, the Baotong's trees. And I'm like, okay, that's very, very interesting in the way it's organized. I'll have to learn more next time, because the teas here were actually very good. So we sit down, and Mr. Zheng joins us. It's Mr. Farmer Tan is there, Zheng and I. And Farmer Tan is a really, really reticent guy, right? He's one of those silent men who like holds a lot of silence within him, and his eyes are always on the distance. Says, single word utterances, and every now and then flashes you a smile that surprises you. But he's got, wrinkles on his face, and he's looking in the distance a lot of the times when he talks to you. But he brews us up some tea, and he's brewing us up some 2021 Gushu tea, which he says he has so much of it. And I'm like, why do you have so much of it? And he's like, oh, it's because of the I Ching, because of COVID, because not a lot of people come out here in the past couple of years because it's so difficult to get like all the appropriate passes to avoid quarantine and stuff like that. And so he has kind of this big backstock, and we're drinking it, and I'm instantly very impressed by it. Taken away by it. The chachi on it is transporting, and I'm like, I already really, really like these teas. And so I kind of ask him, like, can we go up and see the bushes, see the trees, and see the garden and stuff like that? And he goes, sure. And at this point, Mr. Zheng is like, I got to go back to town, but thank you for drinking tea. Thank you for giving me tea. And Denching, if you need a ride back, just call me. I need at least, 2 hours to come up here. I was like, all right, don't worry about it. And Farmer Tan is like, you know what? If you stay up here long enough, we could probably drive you back tonight or tomorrow or something like that. One thing before we go up to the mountains, Farmer Tan is in the process of making a lot of white tea. And so, out on the level area by his factory, he has just a bunch of these bamboo wicker baskets filled with like drying tea. And he goes out there, he moves them from the sunlight to the shade, he flips the tea around to make sure everything's kind of airing out properly, nothing's getting too moist, too hot, because that's what we know creates bad flavors in the white tea. And then he's going out to his other down below, and I kind of follow him, taking photos and stuff. And then I see a really, really one of my favorite things to see. He's making honey. He's making wild honey. And so he has a bunch of beehives and he has it in a muslin sieve, like the honeycomb, and it's slowly dripping honey into a bucket. And it smells so good. And he's telling me, he says, this year's honey is some of the best honey I've ever made. And I'm like, why is that? He's like, the drought. It's so dry. Everything is so sweet. Look at that honey. It's very, very cho. And the cho is like very thick, really viscous. And I'm like, ugh, it looks really good. It's my favorite thing to get in Yunnan, to get in the tea mountains, is this wild honey. A lot of the tea farmers, they'll make their own wild honey. If you remember the Dan Song episodes, I think I talked about Wei's wife who makes her own honey, and her family is really big into making honey, and Wei just hates bees, and so not a very good match right there. But her honey is really good. I remember buying some that she had some aged Dan Song in the honey, and it had set it aside for like 3 years before she sold it, and it was some really good stuff. But this stuff in Yunnan, higher elevation, really, really, really lovely. And so he says he'll sell me as much as I want. I buy, I think, 4 big jars, so about 2 kilograms of tea, or 2 kilograms of tea honey. We go up to his studio again, and he pours me a little dollop of honey in a little hot water, and I drink it, and it's so good. Ugh. Anyways, I shouldn't talk about it too much because this is something I can never export. I can never sell. It's only exists in the mountains or domestically here in China. I brought some back to Yangzhou, but it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So from then we go up into the Bangtong village, Baotong village, and he shows me all of the gushu, all of the chaomu, and he talks about the differences between them. He shows me the chaomu, and the chaomu are huge, twice my height, like 4 meters tall, with trunks, bigger than a leg, very big old trees. Where a lot of people, this would be dashu. This could even border on the gushu if you're not careful. But his chaomu that I usually think of small spindly tea trees are much, much larger. And that's just what he does. And so that's why I think the chaomu material I'm getting from Farmer Tong, is really, really good. I was actually just drinking it today, drinking the chaomu and then drinking the gushu, and thinking about how I wanted to press it. I pressed a mix of the chaomu and gushu last year and called it the motorbike. And I pressed pure gushu from 2021 last year, and I call that the tree spirit. I think this year I'm just going to press pure chaomu because the chaomu is sweet like candy. It has this really nice saline aspect to it, so a lot of depth and umami. And the gushu kind of has this maturity that, it's interesting, but I really like that chaomu quite a bit. And then seeing these trees, I'm thinking back now, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably why the chaomu was so good, is because it wasn't small trees. I'm not sure if I talked about this in the last Pu'er episode, but the different levels of aged trees, tree ages in Yunnan, it usually goes shaoshu, zhongshu, dashu, and gushu. Shao is small, zhong is medium, da is big, gu is ancient. And the difference here, chaomu, is kind of this umbrella term for stuff that is not gushu. Usually it's the mix between zhongshu and dashu, but some people will mix in the shaoshu too. The shaoshu, if you're looking at it, it's more almost like a bush, like really thin, small. If you're thinking of like Pu'er and Simao, this is not quite chaomu. Chaomu is an actual tree, but it is very thin. Xiaomu is sometimes just a little bush, right? It's not a tree that's taller than you. Primarily the zhongshu and the dashu will be spindly trees that are taller than you are. And his chaomu is that umbrella term for the Da Shu and the Zhongshu. And his stuff is very old, very large, and so I'm very impressed with it. We go wandering through the Baotong village's horde of ancient trees, right? It's really just this whole side of the mountain has so many ancient trees on it. Gushu, Zhongshu, Dashu, and he's pointing out the really, really big ones, the ones that are the Danju. Danju means single harvested tea trees, right? And so these guys are just massive, ancient. They have scaffolding around them. And Farmer Tan is telling me that some of these trees, you can get up to 8 kilograms of tea out of a single tree in a season. And when you really think about that, 10 kilograms of tea broken down into 200-gram cakes is only about 50 tea cakes. And so these teas are really still not producing very much for the Danju style, but he says, I can climb it. It's big enough to climb. And so I get up onto the really thick branches and everything's very sturdy. Now, I've been all around China, really sourcing the old trees, the Lao Cong, the Gushu and stuff. And it's only here in Yunnan and Lao that I can actually climb on the trees. Technically, some trees in the Wudongshan mountain you can climb on, but I'm very worried about them. They just have a younger lifespan, they're more delicate, and all of the ancient trees are not ancient really. I mean, the oldest tree I saw in Fuding was only, a couple hundred years old, but it is spindly. Its trunk may be the size of my very thin wrist. I don't have thick wrists. something you might want to know about me. Is really not very large. And so these ancient trees or old trees in Fuding are very spindly, very delicate. A lot of times when they pick them, they bend the branches down to pick it. They bend the trunk in half. Only in Yunnan, really, can you climb these trees. And as I was climbing it, it has this sense of stability to it. At no point I'm worried about it breaking or worried about hurting the tree. It's very, very strong. And so climbing a Gushu Pu'er tree, probably on my bucket list, and I'm happy I've been able to achieve it here. As we're walking through the Baotang garden, I see all these signs that say, picking is prohibited, littering is prohibited. And I asked Farmer Tan, who's picking these teas? It says picking is prohibited. And he says the villagers of Baotang can pick these trees, but nobody else can. A lot of people come here to walk through the mountains. A lot of scholars and schools. Some companies are leased out to be allowed to pick, but they're in uniforms and stuff like that. And so they're very noticeable. And it seems like the idea of this cooperative, the Baotang cooperative that he has, is really just this idea what a lot of people share the land, the villagers share the land, can pick the tea leaves, and then he can produce it for a lot of the other villagers. So I kept trying to push the point because I didn't understand. I was like, whose trees are these? And he's like, there are trees. And I'm like, your trees? Your father's trees? Your parents' trees? Like your mother's trees? And he says, no, it's the villagers' teas, the Baotang villagers' teas. And while I would like to dig into this more, that's essentially the answer I got. And it reminds me of something I saw in, one of the very first episodes about white tea, the Taimushan region, where the villagers on that Lu Shui Ya region all had the teas, there's collectivized and stuff like that. And then the company essentially bought them out, leased their land, and they get this little pension from it. But anyways, as we're walking through the Baotang mountain, the village region on the banks of the Huazhu Liangzi, I'm seeing all of these parked motorbikes with nobody around. And for me, this is becoming iconic. Every time I go to a tea mountain in Yunnan, I'll see a motorbike somewhere. And it's like the pickers just ride their motorbikes up these mountains, pick tea, and then ride the motorcycles down the mountains to deliver the tea to whichever factory is producing it. And of course, as we're walking on the small little dirt paths, there are motorcyclists coming through, pickers that are off duty. Farmer Tong shouts at them, they shout back, just greetings and stuff. And it feels just really, really homey. And he sees this old picker down and he starts asking him questions. It seems like they're pretty friendly. And I go over and I ask hey man, how old are you? And he sets down his bag and he looks at his hands and he goes, 76. And he makes the Chinese hand gestures for 7 and 6. And I'm like, that's epic. How much tea have you picked this today? And he's like, I haven't really measured. He has a big bag over his shoulder. Farmer Tan is like, a lot of these pickers, they can pick 8 to 10 gin a day. Gin is 500 grams, right? And so he can pick like 5 kilograms of fresh leaves a day. And if you, after making it, that makes about maybe 1.25 kilograms of tea. You usually lose about a fourth of the tea in water weight, maybe a fifth if it's really wet. And so I say something like, wow, 76 years old and you've picked 10 gin of tea? That's incredible. And Farmer Tang's like, old guys can pick tea really well. It's the young guys that don't pick it so well. And everyone laughs, and I'm like, that. It's like just a good vibe. Like, I love going into the mountains with the farmer, with the producer, and talking to the pickers and seeing just the camaraderie between them. Again, getting back to this guy Jason, who underpays his Myanmar workers. I really like this feeling a lot more, and that's why it's important for me to do this garden walk, to walk into the fields and see where the tea is coming from and see what's the relationship between the maker and the pickers. And after studying a little bit of Marx, we're relatively tapped into this idea of the labor cost of the tea. We challenge ourselves. How are we adding value to this tea? I mean, physical labor is a cost in itself. Materials is a cost in itself. What are we doing, Alex, Xiaoyan, and I, to add value to this product? And what is the producer doing, to add value to the product? Because really what it comes to is we talk about the tea farmer, but the tea farmer is this incredibly aqueous term. It's never ever usually one person, right? You have somebody who takes care of the garden, sure. Then you have other people that come in and pick it. And then you have somebody else who's making it. And then you have somebody else who's pressing it. And then you have somebody like me who's going in there and buying it and then selling it. And so at every level of that, there's cost. There's cost associated with every single point. And so we're just very conscious of are you ethically adding value to what's actually going on here, to the labor that cost here? Are you putting in your labor cost in different ways? Anyways, I really love seeing this interaction between the farmer and the picker, between the maker and the picker, and just really realizing everything is wholesome, everything is ethical here. I'm not getting any red flags that somebody is being, overtly exploited here. Because really that's what our value is we're going through and we're sounding out everything. We're trying to avoid that exploitation that, as our not very good friend Jason kind of mentioned with the Myanmar teas. Anyway, so after doing that garden tour, we head back to Farmer Tan's factory. And I'll mention again, it's about April 20th. I just looked at some photos and videos I took at the time. The post date is April 20th. And nothing really is happening. There's very little tea going on. The tea the guy was picking is probably going to be made into white tea. Farmer Tan isn't making any more pu'er. He's only focused on white tea, and I'll get into the processing later. But it is really late in the season. So April 20th is very nearly the end of the pu'er season. So we get back to his studio, his factory, his processing place. And again, I haven't really created the picture for you in the mind. There's, similar to if you think of Mengjia's and Laoduan's region, it has this big garage door kind of things that come down and open up the whole side of the building. And inside, one small quarter of it is like a tea table with all the teas, the teawares, the gaiwans, a bunch of big jugs of water. Half of it is, other quarter is there's a TV, some wooden couches, wooden furniture, and then rows and rows of his wild honey. And then one quarter is a lot of his storage. He has the previous years of all of his teas, the gushu teas. He has this year's chaomu. He has this year's gushu. And then the other quarter is a small kind of weighing packaging station. That's one level. On the second level, or on the ground level, he has a kitchen, a bathroom, and then kind of where he's making the teas. It's a larger area with 3 walks, I believe. And he only does wood-fired walks. It's not like Shigwe where they're doing electric walk kind of teas. He's only doing the wood-fired stuff. Here he's also making honey. And by making honey, I mean he's harvested the honeycombs and he's letting them drain through a muslin sieve. And let's see, above this area, which is just next to kind of, I mentioned the tea room, he has his drying pavilion. And the drying pavilion is closed off from the wind, closed off from the rain. He has like plastic sheeting over the top, and walking in there, it feels like you're walking into a sauna. And as I mentioned, there's not a whole lot of new tea going on. It's only his white tea. And so we get back there, we start drinking the teas. I start asking prices and quantities. And yeah, I hear the prices. I'm like, okay, that sounds fair, but the gushu is pretty expensive. Let me think about it. And I call my friend Paul, right? And I'm like, hey, like, he says his gushu is about this much. And Paul's like, yeah, that's a fair price for Huaju Liang's gushu this year. And I'm like, okay, that's all I needed to hear. And then I was like, you know what? I like this stuff. It's my first time here. It's a drought year. And then the gushu he has is from the previous year. So it's 2021. And for me, that's another great sign because 2022 had a lot of rain. A lot of the pu'er in this region from 2022 was a little washed out. But 2021 was a really good year for tea. And so I'm like, you know what? Let's just go for it. And so I bought a little bit of the gushu from 2021 to press into cakes. And then I couldn't decide if I wanted a pure gushu or a gushu and xiaomu for the 2023. I eventually went for the mix because while the gushu from Huaju Liangzi has a really nice chachi, a really good presence, it doesn't have a lot of punch. And the xiaomu I thought was a little too punchy almost at the time. And so I thought, if I blend these together, maybe I'll get the best of both worlds. And this is something that's really common in the pu'er world. I mentioned in the previous episodes is blending teas. And so when I mentioned that maybe I want to get half of the xiaomu, half of the gushu and blend it together, Farmer Tan's like, sure. And so it was really nerve-wracking when we were actually doing it because, there are some things that are irreversible. And so I saw him put all of the gushu onto, this nice clean tarp. And then he weighs out the xiaomu. And he's like, are you sure you want to mix it? And I'm like, yeah. And then he just dumps, 7.5 kilograms of the xiaomu into the 7.5 kilograms of the gushu. And I'm like, ugh, it's done. And then he mixes it all together by hand and then packs them back into a bag. And this is the motorcycle tea cake that we pressed, or motorbike. I don't even know the names. It's the Huaju Liangzi mix from 2023. I'm really excited about that one. I've been drinking it recently, and it's really coming together, gelling together well. However, I really do still like the xiaomu. And as the sourcer of these teas, I'm fortunate enough to save a little bit of the loose tea. So I have a little bit of a xiaomu. This is the younger bushes, the younger tea trees from 2023 in the Huaju Liangzi region. And I have a little bit of the gushu as well. And I was drinking those these past couple days. And honestly, I really like the pure xiaomu stuff. And so I think this year I might just press pure xiaomu. Anyways, after buying these teas, mixing these teas, packaging up these teas, I met with a really immediate need to make a tea cake design. To make a tea cake wrapper again, right? And so I'm trying to figure this out. And Farmer Tan's like, hey, we can eat some dinner, then go down into town, and I can get the stuff printed off, and we might even be able to press it today. I'm like, this is so fast. And so I work on my wrapper design. I have a photo that I took in the mountains of the motorcycles that I saw. I mentioned the motorcycles for me were iconic for this exploring the Yunnan mountains. And I have actually a photo of the Da Shui Shan, the ancient tea gardens, the oldest tea trees. And I put that onto one cover, the tree spirit, the 2021 Huaju Liangzi gushu. And I put the motorcycle onto the 2023 mix of gushu and xiaomu motorbike tea cake I pressed. And so those are my two wrapper designs. We eat some dinner. The dinner is really simple. It's like eggs, tomatoes, some vegetables, some green beans, and then some sausages. I asked him about the local liquor, and he really doesn't have very much. He's like, yeah, I don't drink so much of the local liquor. And I'm like, okay, it's interesting, all these different farmers and their different vibes, right? Lao Duan was not shy about it. Anyways, we get down into town. I get the stuff printed off, but the pressing factory is closed, and so we'll have to do it tomorrow. But anyways, that really sums it up. I don't know if I really want to talk about how, the pressing went. But again, Farmer Tan came down the next day, and we got it pressed at a factory. I really like this factory. It wasn't as clean as the factory up in Linsong, just because the factory in Linsong is an outlier. Like, I've never seen a pressing facility that immaculate, and so that's something else in its entirety. But this one was clean. It was well managed. It was well run, and I was able to press it a little tight. I wish I could have pressed it a little looser, but again, you live and you learn. But that really kind of ends my time in Monghai and Sichuanbana. I was only there for a few days, and I went there without the intention of sourcing tea, which I think is kind of silly. You can take the tea sourcer out of the tea world, but you can't take the tea world out. Anyways, after I got that stuff pressed, I was ready to get out of Yunnan and on with the rest of my tea adventure, because it's still spring, there's still some tea happening, and yeah, it's a big world in China. And so what I do is the next day I get I get Mr. Zhang to drive me back to the Jinghong, and I take a plane to Hangzhou. There's actually a really funny story with Mr. Zhang. I wanted to give him some honey because I bought too much honey. I tried to give one to Paul. He didn't want one. He's like, I'm swimming in Yunnan honey. And I was like, okay, like I kind of have too much for my carry-on bags. And so I gave one to Mr. Zhang, and he was a little awkward about it because he was like, if you do give me this honey, I don't feel like I should charge you for this trip. And I'm like, no, man, it's a gift. And he's like, no, it's you gave me this honey, I shouldn't charge you money. I was like, just take my money, Mr. Jen. Anyways, good people all around the world. Anyways, I end up going to Hangzhou. I meet some friends. We hike the mountains. We drink some of that running tiger spring water. I brew it with my friends in Jiushu, the 9 trees. And then I get out to Anhui. And in Anhui, I meet up with Alex and Xiaoyan. And that, my friends, is an adventure for another time. So this is Derek from One River Tea and Tao Teaware, and I'm really excited about the tea seasons coming up right now. In just a couple days, I'm going to go back to Hangzhou. I'm going to meet my old friends, drink some of the freshest tea in the world right now, and then, get it shipped on to you guys who have put in your pre-orders for Mingqian teas. And guys, this is Derek from One River Tea, just wishing you all a very happy spring. May you be present, may you be in the sun, may the sap in your blood boil through your bones until flowers burst out of your fingertips. Just classic springtime blessings. Anyways, until next time, guys, brew happy.